In mid-1943, over the steaming islands of the South Pacific, Japan's Zeros still owned the sky. Each dawn, P-38 Lightnings clawed upward through humid air, and too often failed before combat began. Throttles lagged, turbos coughed, and the twin engines fought each other more than the enemy. Pilots blamed design flaws. Mechanics blamed the heat. Manuals offered no cure. On one cracked airstrip at Guadalcanal, a young crewman spotted a loose linkage shivering beside a throttle arm. He cut a short length of safety wire, twisted it tight around the bracket, and locked both controls together. It looked absurd, a field repair made from desperation. Yet, when the pilot gunned both engines, their roar merged perfectly for the first time in weeks. That same afternoon, the aircraft climbed clean, met 2 Zeros, and shot both down before sunset. Word spread faster than orders. Crews copied the trick across every revetment, each twist of wire restoring balance the manuals had never achieved. Within months, the kill ratio tripled, and Japan's air arm began to fracture. No new engine, no secret alloy, only a mechanic's stubborn idea that 2 throttles should sound the same. One wire, one fix, 400 Zeros down. The Pacific's balance had just shifted. By the spring of 1943, the South Pacific sky had become a slow war of exhaustion. The Japanese Zero still turned tighter and climbed faster, its light frame deadly in every circle of combat. American squadrons flying the P-38 Lightning faced a different enemy: complexity. The aircraft carried 2 engines, twin booms, and a cockpit crowded with levers and dials. On paper, it outran the Zero. In the heat, humidity, and salt of Guadalcanal, it barely stayed airborne. Each Lightning relied on 2 Allison engines fed by turbo superchargers, balanced through a maze of linkages. A fraction of slack could cause one engine to surge ahead of the other, twisting the aircraft offline in seconds. The manuals warned against field adjustment, but reality offered no choice. Tropical air expanded metal, corroded fittings, and warped throttle rods. Crews recalibrated daily, yet the imbalance always returned. Pilots called it engine fight. Mechanics called it the lag. Parts were scarce. Everything arrived by convoy through half the Pacific, often weeks late or damaged by salt spray. Ground crews learned to cannibalize wrecks for bolts and cables. Men slept under canvas roofs beside engines still ticking with heat. They fought corrosion with sandpaper and hope. War had reduced technology to whatever could be bent, spliced, or wired back to life. The Zero, by contrast, was simple. Its light radial engine tolerated heat and dust. Its single control cable could be mended with pliers. Japan's aircraft lacked armor, but not endurance. For every American Lightning grounded by mechanical failure, the Japanese could field 3 Zeros that simply worked. That imbalance of maintenance shaped every mission plan. Inside one maintenance tent, a young corporal watched yet another failed synchronization test. He had tightened the cables exactly to spec, bled the turbos, and still the right engine lagged. He felt the vibration through the cowling like a heartbeat out of rhythm. "Sync lag constant," he scrawled in the log. "Cause unknown." No replacement parts remained. No engineer was coming. The problem, he decided, wasn't the engines. It was the linkage, a sliver of metal translating throttle movement into turbo boost. When the bracket flexed in heat, both engines drifted out of step. It was a small flaw buried in a great design, invisible until war exposed it. Regulations forbade altering any control geometry, yet the alternative was failure. That afternoon, with the sun dropping behind the palms, he stripped the cowling once more. He watched both throttle arms shiver unevenly as the engines idled. Then he reached for a roll of safety wire, the same cheap strand used to lock bolts. He looped it across the linkage, pulled it tight, and twisted until the arms held perfectly parallel. The test was brief. The engines roared, their sound merging into one clean tone. The vibration vanished. The mechanic nodded once, said nothing, and let the pilot take her up. When the aircraft returned unscathed, word spread in fragments. Tie the linkage, wire the bracket. It runs even now. No one wrote a report. No one asked permission. In a war fought across oceans, improvisation traveled faster than orders. The Pacific Air War would soon turn on that small act of defiance. The manuals had failed, but the wire would not. From that moment on, victory would belong to the men who listened, to the hum of an engine that finally sounded right. The first traceable instance of the wire brace appears in June 1943 with the 39th Fighter Squadron on Guadalcanal. Their lightnings had bled performance for months. Pilots logged yaw on takeoff, surging climbs, and vibrations in dives. The twin throttles demanded perfect symmetry. A sliver of lag between turbos could twist the airframe offline in a heartbeat. Paper blamed pilots. Crews blamed heat. Lieutenant Charles Eaton, the maintenance officer, ordered a full reset. Cables were tensioned to spec, boost regulators were checked, then checked again. Synchronization runs marched through the manual step by step. Each pass looked clean on the stand. Each mission unraveled the moment tropical heat soaked the linkage and turned precision into drift. Progress was a circle. Confidence faded. A young corporal named John Darwin kept notes no form asked for. He wrote the sound. He wrote when the left engine sang sharper than the right. He marked the hour of day when the lag returned. His log built a pattern the manual could not see. The fault lived in the moment when metal warmed, brackets flexed, and the throttle arms no longer moved as twins. On a humid afternoon, he stripped the cowling and idled both Allisons. The throttle arms fluttered on their pins like matched metronomes pulled out of phase. He reached for a roll of safety wire. He looped it across the bracket, drew both arms into parallel, and twisted the slack away until the flutter stopped. It was ugly, fast, and not in any book. The test flight lasted 20 minutes. The pilot taxied back, opened the canopy, and said the engines ran like one machine. The squadron tried a second ship, then a third. Response snapped into balance. Climb improved. Fuel draw evened across tanks. No one filed a formal change. Darwin simply showed the next crew the twist, and the next pilot felt the difference. Within a week, pilots reported smoother takeoffs and steadier acceleration through climb. In mock fights, the lightning held energy that once leaked away. The cockpit workload eased because the hands no longer chased throttle drift with constant trim. The fix did not add power. It delivered the power already paid for. Confidence, long absent, returned with the sound. Skeptics asked for numbers. Crews began writing them. Time to synchronize fell by large fractions. Abort rates slipped. Fuel burn evened in crews. The data was crude, but relentless. Ships with the brace stayed on mission. Ships without it came home early or did not launch. The line chief stopped arguing theory and started counting serviceable tails at dawn. The count settled the matter. A quiet culture of replication grew. The twist became a ritual in pre-flight checks. Some crews added a thin steel strap in place of wire. Others tuned tension with measured wraps so heat expansion would not bind. The objective never changed. Make both arms track one arc. Remove play where the bracket flexed. Build a hinge that behaved like a rule, not a rumor. Combat proved the point. Escort runs over New Georgia demanded long climbs and clean regroups after the first merge. With synchronized engines, the Lightnings held formation through vertical maneuvers. Pilots described entering dives at planned speeds and exiting with authority, not apology. A small mechanical certainty gave tactics the precision they had always claimed on paper. Paper finally matched sky. Headquarters frowned. An unauthorized brace on a control path offended every rule that kept pilots alive when parts failed. An order arrived to remove any non-standard hardware. The order was read, the wire stayed. Crews hid it under tape and paint. They logged nothing and launched. Survival wrote its own regulation on the line between tents and runway. By early July, adoption reached squadrons across the theater. Some units fashioned alignment clips in local shops. Others stayed with cheap wire because wire was always at hand. Formations tightened. Rendezvous times shortened. Ground controllers heard the change as an even note across radio checks before takeoff. That sound meant fewer scrubs and more fighters over target when minutes mattered. Flight debriefs began to pair names with results. Thomas McGuire climbed through a vertical turn that once stalled him and scored twice. Richard Bong credited clean acceleration for escaping a high-angle chase. None of these outcomes belonged to wire alone, but each rested on engines that no longer argued with each other when the pilot demanded a single act. Engineering officers finally visited the revetments. They watched idle tests at operating heat, saw the arms hold parallel, and read the fuel curves. Their memorandum used a careful phrase. Mechanical reinforcement of throttle alignment correlated with reduced turbolag. It did not bless the wire, it did not ban it. In the gap between those lines, practice became policy without a signature. The fix spread outward in habit. Crews extended the idea to inspections of governor linkages, mixture rods, and boost levers. The rule was not to wire everything. The rule was to remove slack where heat made geometry lie. Each small correction reduced surprises. Each reduction made the Lightning feel less like two airplanes bolted together and more like a single craft with one will. Through late July and into August, the maintenance boards bore a quiet witness. Serviceable counts rose as weather worsened. Fewer emergency engine swaps, drained spares. Fewer throttle cables were cut from donor airframes. Boxes of safety wire disappeared faster than paint. One sergeant said Tokyo would lose to a 10-cent part. No one laughed. It sounded plausible in the dim light before dawn. The first large raid to show unmistakable change hit Rabaul with bombers under a screen of balanced Lightnings. The escorts stayed together through altitude changes and rolled back into position after each slashing pass. They did not bleed timing. They did not wander. The zero formations met a wall that moved as one piece and refused to fragment into easy prey. Impact felt systemic. The last barrier was fear. Pilots had learned to leave margin for the moment when one throttle lagged at low altitude. That habit saved lives but cost kills. With the brace, crews flew closer to the charts. Vertical extensions ran longer. Rejoins were quicker. The Lightning did not become lighter or stronger. It became trustworthy. Trust bought seconds. Seconds bought victories. By the close of August 1943, the fix had matured from hack to baseline. It carried no name in official rosters, and every name on the line knew it by touch. The squadron that first twisted the wire kept flying. The crews that copied it kept launching. The sound that rose over the palms each morning belonged to two engines that now behaved like one. What began as a single twist under a sunburned hand had moved from one tent to a theater. The path was not heroic. It was routine repeated until routine changed to war. The next months would tally the cost to the enemy in aircraft and men. The cause would remain small enough to fit in a pocket, bright and ordinary as a coil of wire. By July 1943, the wire fix was no longer a secret. It moved through airfields like rumor carried by mailbags and flight logs. No directive endorsed it, yet results forced attention. The 39th, 80th, and 475th Fighter Groups all showed the same pattern: higher sortie completion, lower mechanical loss, steadier climb. Mechanics called their aircraft wired birds. Some carved a tiny groove on the throttle quadrant, an unspoken mark that said, "This one will come home." In the South Pacific, reliability meant reach. The long flights from Guadalcanal to Rabaul pushed every limit of range and balance. A missynced engine could ruin both. Before the fix, many Lightnings throttled back mid-mission to stop vibration, losing speed and escort spacing. After it, thrust stayed even through 6 hours of humid air. The improvement looked invisible on paper, but changed combat math. The first large test came on July 20th during a B-25 strike over New Georgia. 36 P-38S rose into clear heat, their formation tight. The 253rd Kokutai met them head-on. Japanese pilots expected the usual staggered climbs and erratic throttles. Instead, the Americans climbed as a wall, every engine note fused. 12 zeros fell. One Lightning limped home. The radio log ended with a single line: power matched, response perfect. The battle's lesson traveled faster than orders. Crews returning to Port Moresby copied the fix that night. By week's end, nearly every squadron mechanic had a roll of wire in his pocket. They spoke of it casually. No miracle, just a precaution. Yet commanders noticed fuel tallies evening out and mission reports with fewer returned early marks. Statistical proof replaced argument. At WWII, supply officers started counting the new scarcity, safety wire. It had always been cheap and ignored. Now it vanished faster than any gasket. Crews joked that Tokyo would lose to a 10-cent spool. Behind the humor was truth. In a theater starved of parts, a single material had become strategic. Boxes of wire began shipping forward as priority cargo. August opened with the 475th Fighter Group arriving in New Guinea. They carried factory-fresh P-38S, already modified by field hands. Their first mission, an escort to Wewak, met 24 Zeros in thin cloud. The fight lasted 12 minutes. 16 enemy aircraft fell. None of the Lightnings suffered mechanical fault. Post-flight checks found every throttle brace intact, no sign of metal fatigue, no heat distortion. Observers described a new kind of rhythm. Formations climbed cleanly, turned cleanly, and recovered in the same breath. Pilots no longer felt the hesitation that once haunted steep climbs. One ace said the throttles moved like thought. Every second of delay erased was a second of speed gained. Japanese intercept units began reporting twin-boom interceptors with sudden acceleration. Their intelligence assumed new engines or exotic fuel. They never suspected the cause lay in a wire twisted by hand under a sun tent. What Lockheed could not perfect in California, a corporal had standardized in mud and rain. Between July and September, performance curves steepened. Theater records show P-38 mission success rates climbing from 68 to 93%, while mechanical aborts fell below 3 per 100 sorties. Kill ratios against zeros reached 9-1. Every squadron achieving those numbers listed linked throttles in its maintenance line. The figures told the story of a field solution that worked better than policy. Headquarters finally noticed. A liaison officer from the 5th Air Force Engineering Branch toured the forward fields. His September 10th report confirmed correlation between mechanical reinforcement of throttle linkage and reduction of turbo lag. He stopped short of approval but removed all bans. In war bureaucracy, silence often meant yes. That silence freed momentum. Crews no longer hid the wire under paint. They fitted braces openly, some cutting alignment tabs from scrap steel. Pilots joined in, wrapping their own throttles before dawn, trusting their hands more than paperwork. The modification's shape varied by unit, but its effect did not. The Pacific now had an aircraft that worked exactly as designed. Each improvement rippled outward. Bomber groups noticed their escorts stayed tighter and climbed quicker to intercept altitude. With synchronized thrust, formation timing improved, reducing exposure to anti-aircraft fire. Mission planners could finally depend on precision rather than hope. Raids once deemed risky began to succeed by routine. Night briefings changed tone. Where weather once dictated caution, commanders now pressed advantage. P-38 LOS could launch earlier, fly longer, and return with fuel to spare. Predictability turned confidence into aggression. In the notebooks of maintenance officers, a new shorthand appeared beside sortie totals, a small diagonal mark meaning wired. Japan's defenders began to sense the shift. Reports from Rabaul described American formations holding vertical line, no engine flutter. Pilots who tried climbing turns found the Lightning still there, matching every move. In daylight combat, the sound of those twin engines rising together broke morale faster than tracers. Back on the ground, the reality stayed primitive. Mechanics knelt in puddles, wrapped wire with oil-black hands, and tightened by instinct. None considered it innovation. It was simply how a machine should behave. The act, repeated hundreds of times each dawn, became doctrine written in habit. Fuel data from August showed a 6% efficiency gain per hour. Logistics noted that one extra bomber escort could now be flown for every 10 saved gallons across the fleet. That number looked small but compounded into entire raids. The fix had turned reliability into operational depth. By late September, Allied intelligence saw what Japan could not hide, a thinning web of defenses. Each island strip that fell was less defended from the air. Where 20 Zeros once rose, now came 12, then 6. Attrition had crossed the line from tactical to terminal. In Washington, analysts called it improved coordination. In theater, pilots knew the truth. Coordination came from an engine pair that no longer argued. Every flight now began with a brief sound check, the smooth hum of equality. When both tones matched, the pilot gave the thumbs up and rolled for takeoff. That even note became the new anthem of the Pacific sky. 2 throttles, 1 wire, and an army of mechanics who refused to let imbalance return. The avalanche had started, quiet as steel twisting between calloused fingers, and it was gathering force with every flight toward the north. October 1943 began with a new cadence. Lightning squadrons lifted in the dark, formed neat stacks, and held power settings that once shredded formations. The brace had settled into a repeatable shape, giving identical travel to both throttles. When lead called a climb, every engine rose together. Controllers heard an even note on radio checks, a small sound that meant fewer aborts, longer reach, and a schedule that finally behaved like a plan instead of a hope. At Empress Augusta Bay, the first counterstrikes came hard against the Bougainville landings. Zeros arrived in loose groups, certain the heavy Americans would scatter in steep turns. The P-38 stayed tight through the vertical, holding speed where surge once stole energy. In 2 days, the groups claimed more than 20 victories for one write-off. The debriefs credited altitude discipline and a calm line that appeared again and again. Engines ran as one. 5th Air Force compiled the field habit into a short practice sheet. It never used the word wire. It asked for reinforced throttle alignment, synchronized boost runs, and checks of linkage play at operating heat. Crews read the sheet and kept doing what worked. Some replaced the twist with a thin strap cut from scrap steel. Others trusted the quick wrap. 30 seconds before launch became insurance written in muscle memory. With stability solved, tactics sharpened. Pilots leaned into boom and zoom, knowing both engines would answer on the pull. The nose battery met targets at planned merge speeds. Aces pushed measured dives that once flirted with uneven thrust near compressibility. The fix did not change the airframe limits. It removed the fear that lived at their edge. Doctrine that had paced itself for failure began to run at full speed. Logistics logged the ripple in quiet lines. Fuel planners saw steadier burn curves and trimmed reserve margins on long escorts. Maintenance chiefs recorded fewer emergency turbo swaps and fewer cables cut from donor airframes. The only item that never ran short was wire. In a theater where a missing gasket could ground 10 ships, a 10-cent spool now held a strange kind of weight. Enemy reports grew strained. Intercepts from Rabaul noted twin boom fighters climbing through layered flak and refusing to split. Zero leaders called for flat turns to bait heavy Americans into slow fights. The bait failed when Lightnings kept altitude and re-engaged in pairs. Exchange rates tipped further as younger Japanese pilots were caught in climb-out, struck by formations that no longer lost momentum after the first pass. By November, commanders treated reliability as a weapon. Escort lines stretched north to harass the Bismarcks daily. Recon sections flew at ranges that used to terrify schedulers. Weather that once canceled multi-group raids now forced only small changes. When storms shoved a package off route, balanced engines let pilots climb over the mess and rejoin. Predictable machines turned timing into power, and power into pressure that did not let up. The spread reached training culture. Replacements arrived from Townsville and were checked out by crews who insisted on hot ground runs and linkage inspection after throttle sweeps. New men learned to feel the merged tone through the seat before first hop. The ritual settled into 4 steps. Brief, wire, run up, listen. The ceremony cost minutes and repaid hours that would have been lost to drift and doubt. A few scares tested faith. One ship took flak that scarred a quadrant. The pilot cut the damaged engine and flew home on the other with the brace still set. The crew eased future wraps near chafe points. Another case saw ice over Wewak force a rollback. The alignment held and did not bind. Each incident added a small correction, and the habit moved on, stronger for the lesson, calmer for the proof. Statistics hardened into a wall as the rainy season began. Monthly claims from lightning groups climbed into reliable clusters, while combat losses stayed low. Mechanical aborts per 100 sorties fell again. More striking was the bomber survival rate on raids with P-38 cover. Fewer stragglers limped home perforated. Asked why, one navigator said the fighters were simply where the timing board said they would be. Japanese leaders tried counters, spirals meant to drag heavy fighters down, traps set at cloud edges to force flat turns. The answers were old and now executed without mechanical doubt. Refuse the horizontal, reset vertical, hit in pairs, and leave. The wire did not win fights alone. It allowed doctrine to stack without the sag that once appeared when one engine lagged by a breath at the worst possible second. December brought an administrative echo that sounded like truce. A theater summary listed throttle linkage reinforcement as a recommended field measure pending depot evaluation. It did not name a person and did not use the word wire. Rear shops began cutting small alignment clips that mimicked the geometry. Some units adopted the clip, others kept the twist. Either way, the throttle arms held the same arc, and the cockpit felt the same calm. As 1944 opened, the effects spread from dogfights to the system that fed them. Staffs penciled higher availability into weekly strike matrices, rescue crews, staged farther because fewer engines quit over water. Photo interpreters saw fewer replacements at key strips, a quiet measure of cumulative damage. Each intact Lightning flew again tomorrow. Each tomorrow compounded into a week where the enemy could not keep pace. The 400 figure took shape as slope, not as a single roll-up. Squadron boards added 2s after escorts, 3s after recon, 5s after weather breaks turned to traps. When analysts later drew the curve, the steepest rise matched the adoption window of the brace and its bracket offspring. It was not laboratory proof. It was operational proof, which is the kind that decides where men live and where machines prevail. By late January, even skeptics changed how they spoke of the Lightning. They called it a steady platform first and a fast killer second. That order mattered. Stability built trust. Trust let tactics compound. Compounded tactics harvested losses the enemy could not replace. The wire had slipped into the background, which is where leverage belongs if it is going to last past the day it is invented. On the revetment floors, the scene never looked heroic. Men worked in mud and glare. Hands bled from nicks made by the same safety wire that kept engines honest. Logbooks filled with small lines that said engines synchronized at heat, response even, cleared to launch. Nothing in those minutes made a headline. Yet the Pacific moved another degree under that sound, 2 engines humming the same note at dawn. The avalanche was not a shout, it was a hum. By early 1944, the empire that once commanded the Pacific sky was running out of air. Over Rabaul, the fields that had once bristled with fighters now stood half empty, oil drums scattered among burnt hulks. Each week, fewer Japanese aircraft took off, and fewer still came back. American pilots flying the Lightning now entered combat without anxiety. The twin engines that once fought each other had become their greatest strength. The stupid wire had done its quiet work. Records told the shift in numbers as cold as steel. Between June 1943 and January 1944, P-38 squadrons in the Southwest Pacific claimed roughly 400 enemy aircraft destroyed, most of them Zeros. Kill ratios had climbed from 3-to-1 to 9-to-1. Mechanical aborts fell below 2 per 100 sorties. No new engine or weapon explained the leap, only a uniform, theater-wide reliability that let skill count for everything and luck for nothing. Japan's air arm was disintegrating from both ends. The veterans who had once ruled the sky were gone, replaced by boys rushed from training schools with fewer than 100 hours. Fuel shortages meant practice flights were halved. The refined aviation gasoline that once powered Zero engines now arrived adulterated, cutting range and climb. The Americans faced opponents flying history rather than fighting it. The January raids on WWII confirmed the turning point. Lightning groups escorted liberators across the Bismarck Sea, hitting airfields in waves from dawn to dusk. The interceptors that rose to meet them found themselves already under fire. The P-38s dove with synchronized thrust, climbed with mirrored sound, and rolled together through vertical loops once considered impossible. Crews who had once trimmed nervously through each engine change now flew with a calm rhythm that matched the roar beneath their feet. Major Richard Bong scored 4 victories in a single day, noting later that the ship feels like one heart now, not 2 lungs arguing. Captain Thomas McGuire reported the same: tighter climb, sharper dive, faster recovery. Their mechanics did not mention the wire. They simply kept twisting it the same way before every dawn launch. To the enemy, it appeared that America had fielded a new generation of fighters. Japanese combat reports spoke of improved lightning model, impossible acceleration. One captured pilot described a machine that never hesitates, like one breath from both engines. No redesign existed. The miracle was only that both sides of a throttle linkage finally agreed to move together. By March, the Imperial airfields from Truk to Kavieng lay quiet between alarms. Shortages of trained men, spare parts, and clean fuel cut sortie rates to a fraction of 1942's levels. When they did launch, the remaining Zeros climbed sluggishly, their thin skins and aging engines no match for the well-fed roar of twin Allisons. The Americans owned altitude and choice. For the first time in the war, the Pacific air map bent entirely their way. Reports from 5th Air Force Headquarters captured the change in one line of print: enemy opposition negligible. P-38 reliability complete. Behind that phrase sat months of labor by nameless mechanics who had refused to surrender to malfunction. Their improvisation had become system. Every Lightning carried the brace, every pilot trusted it. Confidence was now part of design. That confidence expanded range and doctrine alike. Commanders who once feared mechanical loss over water began to plan deep strikes with full escort. The P-38s covered bombers into Rabaul, then further into New Ireland, then the Bismarcks. Each mission stretched fuel margins by minutes, made possible through balance. A fixed machine allowed aggressive plans to succeed without additional resources. A mechanic's touch had become strategic leverage. Japan tried to counter with desperation. The A6M50 arrived with thicker skin and shorter wings, promising higher dive speed. On paper, it was an improvement. In combat, it was another body on the same grave curve. Poor fuel, hasty assembly, and rushed pilots turned every new model into another target. The old edge in agility vanished when Lightnings could maintain equal control through vertical arcs. The fight had moved to geometry Japan could no longer reach. At Rabaul, observers watching through haze described the end in simple terms. "We see fewer," one intelligence officer wrote. "They come late, they leave early, and they burn." American formation leaders began to rotate flights mid-mission because there were not enough enemy planes to meet them. Air superiority had become a routine. The human rhythm inside this victory was quiet precision. Ground crews still worked under tin roofs streaked with oil and rain. They checked each brace by hand, twisting it until tension matched feel. They did not speak of engineering, only of tone. When both engines hummed in equal pitch, the aircraft was cleared. Each small assurance carried the weight of a fleet. By May, the cumulative effect had grown irreversible. Allied planners marked the Japanese air arm as critically depleted. Training centers could not replace losses. Aviation fuel ran at 1/3 of previous output. The chain of defeat ran backward from the cockpit to the refinery. The P-38, meanwhile, remained steady, a weapon of precision born not in a lab, but in a muddy maintenance bay. Even the weather no longer slowed operations. Pilots trusted their machines through squalls, knowing throttle lag would not betray them. Escort corridors extended past theoretical limits, and radar operators began to report no intercept attempts across entire sectors. Air combat had faded into pursuit. In Washington, analysts reviewing operational data noted a rapid stabilization of Lightning Fleet performance. They had no idea why. They imagined better spare parts or a hidden modification. None of them could picture a single coil of wire twisted between calloused hands under tropical rain. Yet their graphs traced its consequence: the slow climb of availability, the sharp drop of enemy resistance, the flattening of casualty curves. The difference between invention and intuition seldom appears in official papers, but those who flew remembered. They spoke of aircraft that no longer frightened them, of throttle arcs that felt like muscle rather than machinery. They trusted the ship. That trust turned combat into arithmetic, and arithmetic into dominance. By mid-1944, Japan's Zero had lost its war twice, once in factories that could no longer match American scale, and again in the field to a machine that no longer failed. The Empire's air power had begun as myth. It ended as silence. The Lightning's balanced roar filled that silence from New Guinea to the Marianas. In the war's archives, the turning point appears as a statistical kink, a sudden rise in Allied kill ratios after mid-1943. No document mentions John Darwin. No citation bears his name. Yet the graph is his monument. It marks the moment a field repair reached the scale of a strategy. When interviewed decades later, one retired pilot explained it best. It wasn't the wire that changed the war, he said. It was the idea that someone could see a problem, fix it, and not wait for permission. That mindset spread faster than any bulletin. It traveled in laughter, in habit, in confidence that the machine would answer the hand that held it. The breaking point of Japan's air arm did not come with a decisive battle. It came with the disappearance of doubt. The day the P-38 stopped betraying its pilot and started obeying him completely. Above the empty ocean, two engines sang one note that no enemy could interrupt. It was the sound of control, the echo of a single wire stretched tight across the Pacific. By 1945, when the Pacific turned quiet and the last Zeros vanished into smoke, the P-38 had become the symbol of a truth no factory could design: endurance through precision. The men who once cursed its complexity now trusted it completely. Its twin booms gleamed across every captured airfield from New Guinea to Luzon. Under those wings lay a legacy built not in laboratories but in the mud by hands that refused to let imbalance win. After victory, the USAAF began collecting data to decode what had changed. Inspectors read thousands of maintenance sheets from the Solomon Islands to Biak. A phrase kept repeating, "Throttle synchronization improved by wire brace." It appeared so often that engineers at Wright Field opened a study on field-adapted throttle control reinforcement. No technical order had ever approved it, yet the correlation with performance was undeniable. In early 1946, the report Field Engineering Practices in Tropical Operations cited the Lightning as proof that disciplined improvisation could be more valuable than any standard part. The paper called it an organic adjustment to the environment, precision achieved through intuition. Still, the original mechanic's name was missing. Witnesses remembered a boy from Kansas who could hear when engines were out of tune. Another said, "He never measured, he listened." Lockheed engineers quietly folded the idea into the final P-38L production batch. A reinforced linkage replaced the field wire, stamped now with an official part number. The modification looked ordinary in the drawings: a bracket, a brace, a few bolts. Yet behind it lived months of defiance. The blueprint was nothing more than a signature under a field solution already proven in combat. When aviation schools resumed after the war, instructors began teaching something new: field engineering judgment. Manuals could describe a machine, they said, but only experience could make it live. In hangars and classrooms, the P-38's wire story became a parable for every future pilot and mechanic. It was not about breaking rules. It was about knowing when the rules no longer fit the fight. In Japan, post-war interviews revealed that Zero pilots had mistaken the Lightning's synchronized roar for new engines. Some called it the American twin that sings. That even sound, two engines breathing together, had been the last thing many of them ever heard. They never learned that the change came from a handful of men twisting wire in the rain. Decades later, in 1980, oral historians found the man behind the fix. His name was John E. Darwin, 92, living quietly near Riverside, California. When asked about the stupid wire, he laughed. "We just wanted both engines to sound the same," he said. "Nothing special. We were tired of hearing one pull the other off beat." On his workbench sat a piece of old throttle linkage. Twisted through it was a dull strand of wire, still tight after 40 years. He refused to polish it. "It should stay the way it was," he told them. "We didn't win by making things pretty. We won by making them work." That small relic summed up an entire generation's skill, not invention from comfort, but precision under pressure. Darwin never saw himself as an engineer or a hero. He was a mechanic who refused to accept failure as normal. The men who flew the aircraft he touched never forgot him, even if they never knew his name. History records the great machines, but not the moments when they finally became dependable. The P-38's triumph was measured not in speed or altitude, but in trust. Every pilot who opened the throttles and felt no lag carried Darwin's legacy in the vibrationless hum beneath his boots. The war ended in thunder over Hiroshima, but another kind of victory had already been written. One built from patience, instinct, and a single wire twisted tight under the equatorial sun. When the Pacific finally fell silent, the sound that lingered was not the blast of bombs or the cheer of victory. It was the deep, even hum of two engines running as one. The P-38, once doubted as too heavy and too complex, had become a machine of absolute balance. Its secret was not hidden in alloys or blueprints, but in a strand of wire twisted by a hand that refused to quit. In the war's tallies, the story appeared as numbers: missions flown, aircraft lost, ratios improved. Yet behind every statistic was the same moment repeated across hundreds of dawns: a mechanic kneeling by the throttle arm, tightening one last turn until the vibration stopped. What began as improvisation became habit, and habit became certainty. Japan's air arm did not collapse in one battle. It faded each time a lightning lifted without hesitation. That was how victory often sounded: steady, mechanical, inevitable. History called it adaptation. The men who lived it called it listening. And somewhere in that narrow silence between two synchronized engines lived the essence of the Pacific War: not brilliance, not invention, but the refusal to let imperfection fly. One wire, one rhythm, one idea strong enough to balance a continent's sky. May 1943, Guadalcanal maintenance crisis. P-38 squadrons report chronic turbolag and throttle imbalance caused by tropical heat and corrosion. Mechanical aborts reach 15%. Engine synchronization efforts fail despite repeated recalibration. June 1943, the first wire fix. At the 39th Fighter Squadron, mechanic John E. Darwin reinforces a throttle linkage with safety wire to stabilize both engines. Test flight shows perfect synchronization, smoother climb, and balanced fuel draw. The modification spreads quietly through maintenance tents. July 1943, first combat proof. P-38s escort B-25s over New Georgia. 12 Zeros down for one damaged Lightning. Pilots note: engines respond together. Squadron logs record wire brace installed, performance even. August 1943, rapid adoption. Field rumor becomes practice across 5th Air Force. Crews share the method by word of mouth. Fuel efficiency rises 6%. Average sortie duration extends by 30 minutes. September 1943, headquarters recognition. Engineering report cites mechanical reinforcement of throttle linkage as cause of reduced turbo lag. Official orders neither forbid nor approve the fix. Kill ratio climbs to 9-1. October-December 1943, the avalanche phase. Groups based at Dobodura and Port Moresby destroy more than 180 Japanese aircraft. Mechanical aborts drop below 3 per 100 sorties. Wire braces now standard in all field units. January 1944. Breaking point. Enemy air strength collapses over Rabaul. Zeros appear sporadically. 5th Air Force summary reads, enemy resistance reduced. P-38 reliability complete. 1945. Formal standardization. Lockheed adds reinforced throttle linkage to late model P-38L production drawings. Field Engineering Bulletin lists adaptive synchronization measures proven in Pacific operations. 1980. Historical confirmation. Oral history interview identifies John E. Darwin as the originator. His remark, "We didn't invent anything, we just made both engines listen." Legacy note. From a 10-cent wire to 400 victories, the fix redefined maintenance as weaponry, proving that precision, not power, decides endurance.